The man I loved wrote an album about my death, and the whole world wept for me. I took the job archiving his grief so I could see him one last time before I disappeared forever. That's the truth stripped to its bones. The rest is scaffolding. The rest is how I learned that grief can be a door you walk through backward into a room you never expected to find. My name is not important. The one on my driver's license says Elena Voss, which sounds like someone who drinks oat milk and does yoga, which I suppose I do now in this borrowed life. 3 years ago I was Delia Crane, wife of Senator Richard Crane, whose face you would recognize from the news, the kind of face they call trustworthy, which tells you everything about how much a face can lie. Richard didn't hit me, that would have been simpler. He erased me in increments, a word here, a memory there, until I couldn't trust my own perception of the world. When I finally understood that the accident he was planning for me wouldn't be an accident, I ran. I ran with nothing but a burner phone, a bag of cash I'd been squirreling away for 2 years, and the name of a fixer who specialized in making inconvenient women disappear. The fixer was thorough. Delia Crane died in a boating accident off the coast of Maine in the summer of 2021. Her body was never recovered. Richard mourned beautifully. The networks called it a tragedy. I watched from a safe house in Vermont, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of someone else's life, while my husband's approval ratings climbed 7 points. I couldn't stay in Vermont. Richard had resources, instincts, a hunger for control that would outlast any reasonable search. So I became Elena. I learned to introduce myself without hesitation. I took a job in a university archives department, handling dead people's papers, which felt appropriate. I was a dead person's paper. I was my own ghost. The documentary came up in my feed on a Tuesday. I was eating leftover pad thai at my desk, clicking through entertainment news I normally ignored, when I saw his face. Jonah Reyes. My Jonah, though he hadn't been mine in years. The headline said something about a grief album, a critical masterpiece, songs written in the wake of unbearable loss. I understood unbearable loss before I understood the rest. I understood it in my body, the way you understand weather changes. I clicked. The album was called The Blue Hour, named for that time before dawn when the world holds its breath. It was about me, not my name. Richard would have noticed that, would have sued or worse. But I heard myself in every song, the way I laughed too loud when I was nervous. The scar on my left knee from a bicycle accident when I was 12. The specific shade of blue I painted my bedroom in the apartment on Mercer Street. The one where Jonah and I lived together for 2 years, the 2 years that felt like the only real life I'd ever had. He'd written it after my death. He'd believed I was gone. And now there was a documentary, a prestige production, access to his process, his archives, his life. They needed an archivist, someone to organize the materials, the notebooks, the recordings, the detritus of creation. I applied before I could talk myself out of it. I used my new name, my real credentials, my carefully constructed history. I told myself I only wanted to see him once, to know he was well, to hear him say my name even if he didn't know he was saying it, even if he thought he was speaking to the dead. The interview was in Brooklyn in a converted warehouse that smelled of sawdust and expensive coffee. I wore a dress I didn't recognize as mine until I was already wearing it, navy, modest, the uniform of a woman trying to be invisible. The director, a sharp-featured woman named Priya who had already won an Oscar for her last film, asked me about my experience with musical archives. I answered competently. I did not look at the door behind her, the one that led to the studio where I could hear guitar strings being tuned. One more thing, Priya said, checking her phone. Jonah wants to meet any final candidates. He's particular about who handles his materials. I said something agreeable. I arranged my face into the shape of professional calm. The door opened. He looked older, of course. 35 now, silver threading his temples that hadn't been there before, lines around his mouth that spoke of years I hadn't witnessed. He wore a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and I knew that shirt. I had slept in that shirt. I had Elena, he said, and my new name in his mouth was a foreign object, a stone I couldn't swallow. I'm Jonah. I know, I said, and my voice came out steady, miraculously steady. I'm a fan of your work. His eyes held mine. Something flickered there, too quick to name, and then he smiled the way you smile at strangers. Great, Priya says you're the best archivist she's seen. I am, I said, because it was true, because competence was the only solid ground I had left. He nodded, still looking at me, looking through me, looking for something I couldn't identify. When can you start? I started on Monday. The documentary production occupied 3 floors of the warehouse. My office was a converted supply closet on the 2nd floor, windowless, perfect for someone who didn't want to be seen. I spent my first days cataloging Jonah's early notebooks, the ones from before the Blue Hour, from before me, from before everything. I told myself I was being professional. I told myself the tightness in my chest was indigestion. I saw him in passing, in the hallway carrying coffee, in the editing suite listening to playback with his eyes closed. He never looked at me for longer than politeness required. He never gave any sign that he recognized anything in me, any echo of the woman he'd loved and lost. I told myself this was relief. I told myself I could complete the job, collect my paycheck, disappear again with my secret intact. Then I found the new notebook. It was on my desk on a Thursday morning, no explanation, no signature. A leather-bound journal I didn't recognize from my inventory, filled with handwriting I knew better than my own. Jonah's handwriting, from the looping J's to the way he crossed his T's with a small slash instead of a line. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew I shouldn't have opened it. I opened it. The first page was dated 3 weeks ago, the day after my interview. She walks like she's apologizing for the space she takes up. Delia never apologized. Delia filled rooms, but the eyes are the same. The way she tilts her head when she's listening, like she's trying to hear something underneath the words. I am losing my mind. I am writing songs again. I dropped the book, picked it up, read it again. The second page, the new song is called Archivist. Nobody will understand it. She might. If she is who I think she is, she will understand everything. The third page, I cannot say her name. I cannot say anything. If he finds her, if he even suspects, I will bury her twice before I let him touch her again. I will grieve her in public until my throat bleeds. I will keep her safe in the only language we have left. I was crying. I didn't remember starting. The tears were hot on my face, ridiculous, unprofessional. I wiped them with the back of my hand and kept reading. The notebook was full of songs. Fragments, whole verses, chord notations in his cramped shorthand, and marginalia, notes to himself, notes to me, though he couldn't know I would read them, couldn't know for certain that I was who he thought I was. She flinched when I said Elena. Not the name, the sound of a man's voice saying any name. I wanted to kill him then. I want to kill him now, but I will write instead. I will write until there is enough noise to hide her in. New song, The Safe House. Verse about a woman who learns to sleep with her back to the door. Chorus about the man who guards the threshold without her knowing. She'll know. She always knew everything, even when she pretended not to. She's cataloging my grief. The irony would be delicious if I could taste anything. I watch her through glass, through the editing suite window. She handles my old notebooks like they're sacred. She doesn't know she's handling her own history, or maybe she does. Maybe she's been waiting for me to see her. Maybe we're both waiting, both afraid to be first. I closed the book. I walked to the bathroom and splashed water on my face until I looked like someone who hadn't just read her own resurrection in a stranger's handwriting. I went back to my closet and sat in the dark until my breathing evened out. He knew. He'd known from the first moment, and he was, what? Playing along. Protecting me. The songs were messages. I understood that now. The documentary was cover. Every new composition he wrote in that studio down the hall was a letter I was meant to read, encoded in melody because plain speech was too dangerous. Richard was still looking for me. I'd seen it in the news, the occasional mention of the senator's ongoing commitment to maritime safety in memory of his late wife. He was keeping my death current, keeping himself sympathetic, keeping his options open in case I ever tried to surface. If he knew I was alive, if he suspected Jonah knew, I couldn't stay. I should pack my things, leave tonight, find another city, another name, another life of waiting and watching and being no one. But Jonah was writing me songs. After 3 years of believing I was dead, he was writing me back into existence, note by note, in a code only I could break. I stayed. The documentary filmed for 4 months. I know because I counted them, because I marked them in the margins of my own private calendar, because I couldn't stop myself from hoping. Jonah wrote 17 new songs during that time. I heard them in fragments through the studio walls, through playback in the editing suite, through the rough cuts Priya showed me when she wanted my opinion on archival authenticity. To everyone else, they were part of the creative process, the artist working through his grief, finding new directions, new sounds. The critics would later call it his late style, more experimental, more abstract, emotionally raw in ways that the Blue Hour had only approached. I heard what they couldn't. In Archivist, the way the melody spelled out my real name in musical code, a system we'd invented together in bed one rainy weekend, assigning notes to letters, laughing at our own cleverness. In The Safe House, the specific chord progression that meant I am here. I am waiting. I will not leave. In Blue Hour Reprise, the whispered lyric that translated to I see you. I have always seen you. We never spoke of it directly. We couldn't. Richard's people were everywhere, even invisible, especially invisible. A senator's office has tentacles in every institution, every industry, every place where power congregates. The documentary was high profile enough to attract attention, to require security clearances, background checks. Jonah had passed them. I had passed them, barely, my new identity holding up to scrutiny because Richard's fixer had been expensive and thorough, but any anomaly, any hint of conspiracy between us would crack the shell of my protection, so we spoke in songs, in glances across rooms. In the coffee he left on my desk every morning, exactly how I used to take it, 2 sugars, oat milk, though I'd never told anyone here my preference. In the way he positioned himself between me and windows, between me and doors, a bodyguard's instinct dressed up as coincidence. I catalogued his archives, I touched his handwriting from years ago, from when we were young and stupid and thought love would be enough to protect us. I found the letter I'd written him, the one explaining why I had to marry Richard, why I had to choose security over passion, pragmatism over joy. I had thought I was being kind, I had thought I was setting him free, he'd kept it, he'd kept everything. In the 4th month, Richard came to New York. I didn't know until I saw it on the news, some fundraiser, some political dinner. He was in the city for 48 hours. I spent them in my apartment with the curtains drawn, my phone off, my heart a trapped bird against my ribs. Jonah sent me a song through the documentary's internal server, a file labeled rough demo _12.m4a that I knew was meant for me. I played it once. It was called The Hunter. And it was the first song he'd written that wasn't about grief. It was about waiting, about patience, about the moment when the prey turns and finds the hunter's throat in her teeth. He thinks he's watching you, the lyrics went in our code, and then breaking into plain speech because Jonah was angry, because he was scared, because we were both running out of time. He doesn't know I'm watching him. He doesn't know the album is almost done. He doesn't know the last song is for you, alive, walking out into the light. I understood then what he was planning. The documentary's final sequence would be a concert, a live performance of the new material, the late-style songs that critics were already calling his masterpiece. Jonah was going to play me my freedom in front of thousands of people, in front of cameras, in front of the world. He was going to make my resurrection public before Richard could make it private, before he could reach me with his hands or his lawyers or the accident that had been waiting for 3 years. It was insane, it was beautiful, it was terrifying. I wrote him a message for the first time, our old code slipped into a notebook I knew he'd find. The hunter knows. Be careful, I can't lose you again, he wrote back that night in the margins of a lyric sheet I was cataloging. You never lost me. You never will. Trust the music. The concert was scheduled for the last Friday in October. The documentary crew had secured a historic theater in Harlem, 600 seats, broadcast rights to a major streaming platform. Jonah would perform solo, just voice and guitar, the way he'd started, the way we'd fallen in love in a cramped apartment with thin walls and neighbors who never complained because his playing was that good. I helped set up the archives display in the lobby, photographs and notebooks, and the story of artistic creation. I wore black, invisible, professional. Richard was in Washington now, the fundraiser concluded, but his presence lingered, a pressure system I could feel in my joints, my teeth, the space behind my eyes. Priya found me an hour before showtime, nervous in a way I'd never seen her. Jonah wants you in the front row. He says the archivist should see the work completed. I should stay backstage in case. He was very specific. She looked at me with the curiosity of a woman who missed nothing. He said to tell you she'll understand when she hears it. I understood now. I understood I was walking into something that would change everything, that would end my hiding or end me, that there was no third option. I understood that Jonah had spent 4 months preparing this moment, and I understood that I trusted him, that I had always trusted him, even when I left him, even when I married a man I didn't love, even when I let the world believe I was dead. The theater filled. I took my seat in the center of the front row, surrounded by critics and industry people and the documentary's financial backers. The lights went down. Jonah walked downstage carrying nothing but his guitar, and the applause was a wave that seemed to lift him, to carry him to the stool and microphone waiting in the single spotlight. He didn't speak at first. He played a tuning note, adjusted a string, and began. The first songs were from the Blue Hour, the Grief album, the ones the world knew. He played them beautifully, devastatingly, and I wept openly because I was allowed to weep for my own death, because the woman in the songs was me and also not me, a ghost I was ready to finally lay to rest. Then he paused. He looked directly at me, into me, through the disguise and the years and the names we'd both worn. I'm going to play something new, he said, and his voice carried the slight tremor of absolute intention, something I wrote for someone I lost and found, and am still finding every day. He began to play. The song was called Elena Walking. It used our code and broke it, layered meanings like sediment, like the Earth's history written in rock. To the audience it was a love song, mysterious, addressed to a woman who seemed to exist in fragments, in glimpses, in the space between notes. They heard fiction, they heard art. I heard my name, not Alina, Delia. My real name encoded in the melody's bones in the specific intervals he'd taught me years ago, in the rhythm of the chorus that matched the cadence of my mother's voice saying my name when I was small. He was singing me into existence. He was singing me free. Delia walking out of the blue hour, the chorus went, and I understood that the blue hour was over, that dawn was coming, that I could stop being a ghost now. Delia alive in the archive of my heart. Delia who chose to live. Delia who will choose again every morning, every song. The final verse was in plain speech, no code, nothing hidden. He was taking a risk I couldn't calculate, couldn't protect him from. But his voice was steady and his eyes were on mine, and I understood that this was the only way he knew to love me, completely, publicly, without regard for consequence. If you're listening, he sang, if you're in this room or any room, if you're hiding or running or waiting for permission to exist, this is your permission, this is your song. This is your life returned to you. I loved you when you were dead. I love you now that you're alive. I will love you through whatever comes next. The last chord hung in the air. The theater was silent, then roaring, standing ovation. The sound of hundreds of people moved by something they couldn't name. I was standing too, I realized, my face wet, my hands shaking, my heart was beating, I was breathing, I was alive in a room full of witnesses. Jonah left the stage, he didn't take a bow, he walked through the wings, through the door, into the lobby where I was already moving, already meeting him, and then his arms were around me and I was saying his name, my real name, both our names, the true ones we'd kept hidden for so long. Richard, I said when I could speak, he'll, let him come. Jonah's voice was fierce, tender, the voice of the songs and also just a man's voice, rough with emotion, with hope. Let him try. The documentary airs in 3 months, the album releases tomorrow. Everyone who matters already knows, Delia. Everyone who matters already knows you're alive and that I know and that I've known since the moment you walked into that warehouse with your new name and your old eyes. He could try. Jonah pulled back to look at me, really look, and I saw the years we'd lost and the years we might find. I saw the risk he was taking and the certainty underneath it. But he's a politician, Delia. He needs deniability. He needs his wife's death to stay tragic, not suspicious. If he comes after you now, he has to explain why he's persecuting a woman who looks exactly like her. Why he's threatened by a musician's love songs, why he can't let his grief rest. I've spent 4 months making sure the story is too public to bury. You're safe now. Or as safe as anyone ever is. I didn't believe him, not entirely, not yet. Safety was a habit I'd broken, a language I'd forgotten. But I let him hold me. I let myself be held. The theater emptied around us, the documentary crew filming discreetly from corners, capturing what they thought was a reunion between artist and archivist, a moment of creative connection. Human interest for the final cut. They would learn the truth later. Everyone would. The album's liner notes, released the next morning, included a dedication for Dee, who taught me that grief is just love with nowhere to go. I'm learning to give it somewhere to land. The critics would puzzle over it. The fans would theorize. And somewhere in a Senate office, Richard Crane would read those words and understand that he'd lost, that his dead wife had outmaneuvered him, that the control he'd killed for had slipped through his fingers in a concert hall in Harlem. We didn't go back to my apartment. We went to his, the one on Mercer Street, the one I'd fled years ago when I chose safety over love. It looked different and exactly the same. New paint on old bones, his books and my books mixed together on shelves that had waited for me. I kept your things, he said, not apologetic, just true. The clothes you left, the coffee mug with the chip. I couldn't throw them away. I couldn't quite believe you were gone. I was gone, I said. For a while I was gone, even to myself. And now, I looked at him. At the man who'd written me back to life in melodies only I could hear. At the risk he'd taken, the public grief he'd performed to keep my secret, the patience of 4 months of coded conversation when a single word could have ended everything. Now I'm here, I said. Elena Voss, archivist. Delia Crane, dead woman. Whoever I am, whatever comes next, I'm here. With you. If that's what you're offering. He laughed, the sound breaking something open in my chest, joy and grief and hope all mixed together, the blue hour finally ending. I'm offering songs, he said. And coffee in the morning. And the rest of my life spent learning who you're becoming. I'm offering the only thing I know how to give, which is everything. Richard tried, of course. A lawsuit claiming emotional distress, claiming Jonah had exploited his tragedy, claiming the claims didn't matter because Jonah's lawyers were better and the public story was already set. The senator who couldn't let his wife rest, the widower who saw ghosts everywhere. By the time the documentary premiered, Richard was negotiating a settlement, a quiet retirement from public life. A farm in Virginia where he could nurse his grievances in private. I testified, eventually. Not about the marriage, not about the years of erosion and fear, but about the boating accident that wasn't, the fixer who'd helped me disappear, the life I'd built from nothing, immunity in exchange for truth, the prosecutor said. A new identity, legally sanctioned this time, with a past that could withstand scrutiny. I kept Elena, it suited me, the person I'd become in hiding. But I reclaimed Delia too, in the songs Jonah kept writing, in the album he released the following year called The Living Archive, every track a love letter to a woman who was finally fully present in her own life. The title track played on the radio one morning as I was making coffee, 2 sugars, oat milk. I stopped, listened, heard my 2 names braided together in melody, the code and the plain speech, the hidden and the revealed. She is the archive and the living, the chorus went. She is the song and the singer, she is every version of herself, and I am lucky enough to know them all. Jonah came into the kitchen, still sleep-rumpled, and wrapped his arms around me from behind. We stood there, swaying slightly to the rhythm of our own story, the one we'd written in public and private, in code and in clear. Do you ever miss it? He asked sometimes. The hiding, the secret? Never, I said, always, because it was true. The secret had kept me alive, but the telling was what let me live. The song ended. Another began, some other artist, some other story. I turned in Jonah's arms and kissed him, morning breathed and real, no code required, no translation necessary. We had time now. We had time for all the songs still unwritten, all the mornings still unlived, all the versions of ourselves still becoming. The blue hour was over, the day was here, and I was finally home. I turned in Jonah's arms and kissed him, morning breathed and real, no code required, no translation necessary. We had time now. We had time for all the songs still unwritten, all the mornings still unlived, all the versions of ourselves still becoming. The blue hour was over, the day was here. And I was finally home. The knock came at 8:30. Jonah's hand tightened on my hip. We both froze, the way you do when happiness has been conditional for so long that any interruption feels like threat. 3 years of running had trained my nervous system to interpret every unexpected sound as the beginning of the end. It's probably Priya, he said, but he didn't move toward the door. She wanted to discuss the final cut today. She would call first. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. I had learned to perform calm in moments of panic, to buy myself time to think. She always calls. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps, official, impatient. I stepped back from him, reaching automatically for the phone I no longer carried, the weapon I didn't own, the exit strategy that no longer existed. My hands found empty air. I'll get it, Jonah said, and his voice had shifted into something harder, the tone he'd used on stage when he needed absolute silence from a room. Stay here. Actually, no, come with me. I want you where I can see you. We walked to the door together. He opened it without checking the peephole, which I would later learn was a choice, a refusal to hide in his own home, a declaration that the years of coded messages had earned him this much courage. Richard's sister stood on the landing. Margaret Crane was 53, a corporate lawyer with a reputation for surgical precision in negotiations and absolutely no public profile beyond the occasional family Christmas photo. I had met her 7 times in my marriage to Richard, always at obligatory gatherings, always with the sense that she was cataloging my weaknesses for future reference. She was not supposed to know where I lived. She was not supposed to know I lived. Margaret. I said her name before I could stop myself, before I could remember that Elena Voss shouldn't recognize her, that the performance of my new life required certain ignorances. She smiled. It was worse than Richard's smiles, which at least announced themselves as performance. Hers looked genuine, interested, almost warm. Delia, she said, or do you prefer Elena now? May I come in? Jonah moved slightly, placing himself between us without seeming to move at all. You can say what you need to say from there. Margaret's smile didn't waver. The protective boyfriend, how touching, and how public you've both been about your little reunion. My brother is, well, he's not handling it well, as you might imagine. He's not handling it at all, I said. He's negotiating a settlement. He's retiring from public life. That's what handling it looks like. Margaret's eyes flicked to me, and I saw something there that I hadn't expected. Not anger, not even disappointment. Assessment, cool and complete, the way she might evaluate a company for acquisition. Richard is emotional, she said. He makes emotional decisions, which is why I've always managed the practical ones. The settlement you're referring to, it protects him from prosecution, yes. It does not protect you from me. She reached into her bag. Jonah tensed, and I found myself stepping forward, placing my hand on his back, a signal we hadn't rehearsed but that he understood. Wait, let her play this out. We need to know what she wants. What she produced was not a weapon. It was a photograph. She held it where I could see it, not offering it, not threatening with it, simply displaying it like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was attending. The image showed a woman in a hospital bed, gaunt, gray-skinned, unmistakably dying, tubes in her arms. A man holding her hand, his face turned away from the camera, but I knew Richard's shoulders, Richard's posture, the particular way he occupied space even in grief. Your mother, Margaret said. Catherine Crane, though she kept her maiden name after the divorce. Richard has been supporting her care for 15 years, private facility, the best treatment available, costs that would bankrupt most families. He never told you. I looked at the photograph. I looked at Margaret's face, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the angle I was missing. She's alive? My voice sounded distant, someone else's voice, someone else's shock. She's dying. Liver failure, finally, after years of holding on. The doctors give her a month, perhaps 2. Margaret returned the photograph to her bag with the efficiency of a woman who had made her point and was ready to move to terms. Richard has been her sole support since your father abandoned them both. He is, in his way, a loyal man, to family, to the people he considers his. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I was already beginning to understand, already feeling the shape of the trap closing around a vulnerability I hadn't known I possessed. Because Richard wants to see you. Margaret's tone was conversational, almost sympathetic. One meeting. Private, no lawyers, no recording devices. He wants to explain himself, he says, to apologize, to say goodbye to his wife before he loses the only parent he has left. He tried to kill me, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, too blunt for the coded world I'd been living in, too direct for the person I'd become. He staged my death. He was planning to protect you from himself, Margaret interrupted, and her composure cracked slightly, showing something underneath that looked almost like exhaustion. I'm not defending him, I'm explaining the terms. Richard is not well, Delia. He hasn't been well for a long time. The doctors call it narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid features, which means he believes his own narrative absolutely, which means he genuinely cannot understand why you ran from the safety he was offering. Safety, Jonah repeated, the word heavy with everything it didn't contain. His version of it, yes. Margaret shrugged, a gesture of lawyerly neutrality. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm not asking you to understand him. I'm telling you that my brother has resources you haven't accounted for, allies who are not subject to the settlement he negotiated, and a sister who is considerably more patient and considerably less emotional than he is. She paused, letting that settle. 1 meeting, 1 hour. In exchange, I guarantee, and I am very good at guaranteeing things, Delia, you should research my record, that Richard will accept your death certificate as final, that he will not pursue Jonah professionally or personally. That he will retire to Virginia and live out his remaining years as a man who lost his wife to tragedy, not as a man hunting a ghost. And if I refuse, Margaret's smile returned, smaller now, more honest, then I stop managing him. I stop cleaning up his messes, controlling his impulses, making sure his worst instincts stay private. I let him loose in the world you've just re-entered and I see what happens. My money is on nothing good, but I've been wrong before. We let her leave, we didn't agree to anything. We stood in Jonah's kitchen with the coffee going cold and the morning light moving across the floor and the weight of a choice we hadn't anticipated pressing down on us both. Your mother, Jonah said finally, you never mentioned. She left when I was 4. I heard my own voice from far away, the voice of a woman telling a story she'd stopped examining years ago. Richard told me she was dead. I had no reason to doubt him. I had no reason to look. You could look now. I could. The thought opened something in my chest, fear and hope mixed together, the possibility of a past I hadn't known I'd lost. But the cost. He'll have cameras, I said. Recordings, some way to use the meeting against me even if she doesn't know what he's planning. Probably. And if I don't go, she'll let him. I stopped, the reality of it settling in. Margaret wasn't threatening me directly, she was offering me a choice between 2 versions of destruction, trusting that I would choose the one that felt like agency. Jonah turned to face me, his hands finding my shoulders, his eyes holding mine with the same intensity he'd used on stage, the same absolute attention he'd given to songs that were also messages, also choices, also risks. You don't have to decide now, he said. You don't have to decide ever. We can leave. We can disappear again, both of us this time, somewhere Margaret's guarantees don't reach. We'd be running forever. Yes. He didn't flinch from it. But we'd be running together, that's different from running alone. I thought of the years in Vermont, in the borrowed life, the careful construction of Elena Voss. I thought of how tired I'd been, how vigilant, how certain that any comfort was temporary, any peace a lie I was telling myself. I thought of my mother, dying in a facility I'd never visited, supported by a man I'd married for safety, betrayed by in ways I was only beginning to understand. I need to see her, I said. Not Richard, her. If she's real, if she's actually, I need to know what happened, why she left. Whether any of the story I believed was true, then we'll find a way. Jonah's hands tightened on my shoulders. Not Margaret's way, not Richard's terms, but we can hire investigators, lawyers, people who specialize in finding the truth without walking into traps. She doesn't have time for that. The words came out harsh, raw, the first feeling breaking through my careful control. A month. Margaret said. Maybe 2. However long investigations take, she might not. Delia. He said my name the way he had in songs, the way he had on stage, with all the weight of recognition and choice and love that had survived death itself. You just came back to life. You just stepped into the light. Don't let him pull you back into the blue hour because he found the one lever that still works. I pulled away from him. Not far, just enough to think, to feel the space between us as a place where I could still be my own person, make my own choices, own my own risks. He doesn't get to control this, I said, working it out as I spoke. He doesn't get to be the gatekeeper to my mother's deathbed because he paid her medical bills. But I can't let her die without knowing if she wanted to find me, if she tried, if the whole story I've carried about being abandoned was. I stopped. The grief was rising in me, unexpected, unearned by any actual loss I could name. A mother I'd never known, a narrative I'd accepted without question, a hole in my history that I'd learned to walk around without acknowledging its shape. I'll go with you, Jonah said. If you decide to meet him, I'll be there. Not in the room if that's the condition, but close enough. Close enough to hear if you need me. And if I need to go alone? He was quiet for a long moment. The coffee machine beeped, finished its cycle, began to cool. The morning moved on without us, indifferent to our decisions. Then I'll wait, he said. I'll wait and I'll trust you and I'll be here when you come back. That's what I'm offering now. Not protection you didn't ask for. Presence you can count on. I called Margaret that afternoon. Not from Jonah's phone, from a burner I bought with cash at a corner store, the old habits asserting themselves even as I tried to build something new. I called from a park bench 3 blocks away where I could see the apartment window and imagine him watching, waiting, trusting my choice. One condition, I said when she answered on the second ring, unsurprised, prepared. I see my mother first, alone. Richard can have his hour after, but I need to know her without his version of her in my head. Margaret was silent for a moment. I heard her breathing, measured, controlled, the respiration of a woman who had built her life on negotiation and was calculating the value of this concession. She doesn't know about you, Margaret said finally. The stroke that precipitated the liver failure, it damaged her memory. She lives in the past, mostly, her childhood, her marriage to your father, the years before you were born. Richard visits and she doesn't recognize him. She thinks he's a doctor, sometimes a nurse. The staff has learned not to correct her. Then why does he? Because he's loyal. Margaret interrupted, and for the first time I heard something like feeling in her voice, something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. Because he believes in the performance of care even when the recipient can't receive it. Because he is, as I said, not well and his sickness takes strange shapes. I absorbed this, the mother I might find, the mother who might not find me. Still, I said, I want to see her, before I see him, that's non-negotiable. Tuesday, Margaret said, I'll text you the address. Come as Elena, the facility has security but they won't question a visitor. Richard will meet you there at 3, I'll make sure he's contained as much as he can be contained until you've had your time. She hung up before I could ask what containment looked like, what version of her brother she was promising, whether any of this was real or all of it was manipulation, layer on layer until I couldn't find the floor. I walked back to Jonah's apartment slowly, giving myself time to feel the city around me, the ordinary miracle of being visible, being present, being someone whose movements weren't tracked and planned and feared. He was at the window when I came into view. He raised his hand, not quite a wave, more a signal. I see you. I'm here. Keep coming. I kept coming. The facility was in Westchester, a converted mansion on grounds that had probably been impressive before they were medicalized, paved for accessibility, planted with trees that would never grow tall enough to block the view of other buildings, other lives. I arrived at 10 in the morning, hours before Richard's scheduled appearance, wearing clothes Jonah had helped me choose, professional, anonymous, the uniform of a woman visiting a relative she couldn't quite claim. Margaret had texted the room number, no other instructions. I found it myself, navigating corridors that smelled of antiseptic and something sweeter, flowers or air freshener, the scent of places trying to mask their own nature. The door was open. I knocked anyway, heard a voice say, "Come in," and stepped across the threshold into my mother's presence for the first time in 30 years. She was smaller than I'd imagined, not just the wasting of illness, though that was present, the sharpness of her cheekbones, the fragility of her wrists, but something in her posture, her energy, a quality of being folded in on herself that made her seem less present in the room than the furniture, the window, the photograph on her nightstand of a young woman I didn't recognize. "Hello," she said, and her voice was clear, stronger than her body suggested. "Are you the new nurse? I'm afraid I don't need any more tests. I've been tested quite enough." "I'm not a nurse." I moved closer, drawn by something I couldn't name, some recognition that operated below consciousness. "My name is Elena. I'm visiting." "How nice." She smiled, and I saw my own smile in it, the shape of my mouth in hers, the specific way the left side lifted slightly higher than the right. No one visits anymore, except the doctors who think they're being kind. Sit, please, there's a chair. I sat. The chair was hard, institutional, designed for brief stays. I found myself wanting to stay longer, to learn everything this room could teach me about the woman who had made me and left me and apparently never looked back. You're younger than the others, my mother said, studying me with eyes that were sharp despite everything, the color of my own, the color of Richard's, hazel, changeable, catching light differently depending on angle. Are you a student? Doing some kind of project on old women? I stopped. The truth was too large for this room, too dangerous for this fragile woman who didn't know she had a daughter sitting 3 feet away. I'm learning about families, I said finally, how they break, how they might be repaired. Ah. She nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Families. Yes, I had one of those, a husband who left, a daughter I couldn't. She stopped, her face clouding, the memory slipping away or being pushed away by whatever damage lived in her brain. I had a daughter, she repeated, more firmly. But she died, I think. Or I died. It's hard to keep track, isn't it, of who's alive and who's only remembered. Your daughter is alive, I said, and the words came out before I could stop them, before I could remember Margaret's warning, the conditions, the careful architecture of this visit. She's alive and she's here and she wants to know you, if you want to know her. My mother's eyes focused on me, really focused for the first time since I entered. I saw confusion there and something else, something that might have been hope or might have been fear, the same uncertainty I felt in my own chest. Elena, she said slowly, testing the name. That's a pretty name, Greek, isn't it? Means light or torch or something bright against the dark. It does, I said, surprised. Someone told me that once. I wanted to name my daughter Helen, she continued, her voice gaining strength, memory operating in channels I couldn't predict. After the light. But Richard's father insisted on Delia, his grandmother's name. I didn't have the strength to fight him. I never had the strength to fight anyone, which is why. She stopped again, but this time the memory seemed to hold, to stabilize. Which is why I had to leave. For her sake, because I knew what he was, what he would become, and I couldn't watch it happen. I couldn't watch her become. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw the moment of recognition arrive, uncertain, provisional, easily dismissed. You have her eyes, she said. Elena's eyes. The same color, the same. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched my face before I could prepare for it, the warmth of her palm against my cheek, the intimacy of a gesture I hadn't known I was missing. You're very kind to visit an old woman. Very kind to let her pretend for a moment that the past might be otherwise. I leaned into her touch. I let myself for this moment be her daughter in truth, be the child she'd lost and found and couldn't quite believe was real. I'll come again, I said, if you'd like. I can tell you about my life, about the person I've become. I'd like that, she said, and her hand dropped, tiredness overtaking her, the effort of clarity too much to sustain. I'd like that very much. Though I should warn you, I may not remember. I forget so many things now. The present, mostly. The past stays clearer, which seems backwards, doesn't it? Shouldn't we remember what happened yesterday better than what happened 40 years ago? Maybe the past is more important, I said. Maybe that's why it stays. Maybe. She smiled again, my smile, and closed her eyes, the conversation over, the moment passing into whatever dream or memory occupied her now. You're a kind girl, Elena, whoever you're learning about families for. I hope they appreciate you. I sat with her until her breathing evened into sleep. I memorized her face, the shape of her hands, the particular way the light fell through her window and caught the gray in her hair. I made promises to myself I didn't know if I could keep, to return, to claim her, to build something from the wreckage of all our silences. Then I looked at the clock and saw that it was 2:30, and I understood that the hour Margaret had promised was almost over, that Richard was waiting somewhere in this building or would be soon, that the choice I had made to see my mother first had cost me the preparation time I might have used, the mental armor I might have assembled. I walked to the door. I looked back once at the small shape in the bed, at the photograph on the nightstand that I now recognized as her younger self, the woman she lived in now, the woman who had made choices I was only beginning to understand. Then I went to meet my husband. He was in the garden, as Margaret had arranged, a walled space that felt separate from the facility, separate from time itself. He sat on a stone bench with his back to the building, looking at nothing in particular, a man practicing the posture of contemplation he had perfected for cameras. I almost turned around. I almost walked back through the building, out to the parking lot, back to Jonah and the life we were trying to build. The impulse was physical, a pressure behind my sternum, my body's memory of danger more reliable than my mind's assessment of risk. But I had promised myself truth. I had promised myself that I would not run from this, that I would hear whatever he had to say, that I would face the man who had tried to erase me and understand finally whether he had ever seen me at all. Richer. He turned. His face, I had prepared myself for his face, or believed I had. But the years had changed him more than I'd expected, or perhaps I was seeing him clearly for the first time without the filters of survival and self-deception. He looked tired. He looked frightened. He looked, more than anything, alone. Delia. He didn't stand, he didn't reach for me, he simply said my name, my real name, with something that might have been relief. You came. Alina came, I said. Alina Voss, archivist. Delia Crane is dead, you made sure of that. Yes. He nodded, accepting this. I did. I made many things, Delia. I made us. I made our life. I made your death when you forced my hand. I'm not proud of all of it. But I'm here to explain if you'll listen. I'm here to. Margaret says I should apologize. I'm not certain I know how, but I'm willing to try. I sat on the bench, leaving space between us, enough space for escape, for reaction, for whatever might come next. Explain then, explain why you tried to kill me. Explain why you spent 3 years pretending to mourn a woman you wanted dead. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different from the one I remembered. Not the performance of public Richard, not the manipulation of private Richard, but something more stripped, more raw. I never wanted you dead, he said. I wanted you safe, from me. From what I knew I was capable of. The accident I planned. It was meant to give you escape. A death certificate. A new identity, resources I could provide without connection. You were supposed to disappear with my help, Delia. Not alone, not afraid, not with your help. The laugh that came out of me was ugly, surprised, genuinely amused by the absurdity. You were going to help me by killing me? By freeing you. He turned to face me and I saw tears in his eyes, real or performed I couldn't tell. Perhaps he couldn't tell anymore. I knew what I was becoming. I could feel it, the rage, the need for control, the way I looked at you and saw only something I owned, something that reflected me. I didn't want to be that man. I wanted to be the man you married, the man who could still— There was no such man, I said, and the words came out gentle, almost sad, the recognition finally arriving. You were always this. The performance of goodness, the appearance of care. I married the performance, Richard. I never knew you, and you never knew me. I knew you were unhappy, he said it simply, a fact between us. I knew you were planning to leave. I found the cash, the contacts, the preparations. And I thought if I made it easier, if I gave you the push you needed, you thought you'd control even my escape. I stood, the conversation suddenly unbearable, the garden too small, the walls too close. You don't get to reframe attempted murder as a gift, Richard. You don't get to claim you were protecting me from yourself while you were planning to erase me. That's not love, that's not even coherent. I know, he stood too, unsteady, older than his years. I know that now, the settlement, the retirement. It's not punishment, Delia, it's acceptance. I'm not well, I've never been well. The doctors Margaret found, they explain it in ways that make sense finally, why I couldn't, why I always needed to. He stopped, struggling. I'm trying to say that I understand now what I cost you, what I tried to cost you. And I'm trying to let you go, truly let you go, in the only way I know how. By threatening me through your sister, by demanding this meeting as the price of peace. He flinched. Margaret has her own methods. I didn't. I asked her to arrange contact. I didn't know she would. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. What I did, what she did, it's all part of the same pattern. Control dressed up as care. I see it now. I'm trying to learn not to do it. I looked at him, this man I had married, this man who had tried to unmake me. I tried to find hatred in myself, or pity, or any of the emotions that would make sense of this moment. What I found was emptiness, a space where feeling should be, the final recognition that he had never been real to me, that our marriage had been a story I told myself because the alternative was too frightening to face. I forgive you, I said, and the words surprised us both. Not for you, for me. Because carrying your weight is too heavy and I'm tired of being heavy. I forgive you, Richard, and I release you, and I hope you find whatever help you actually need, not the performance of help you've settled for. Delia, my name is Elena now. I walked toward the garden gate, toward the building, toward the life waiting for me beyond this walled space. Elena Voss, archivist. Delia Crane died in a boating accident, remember? She died, and I lived, and that's the end of our story. Your mother, he said, and I stopped, hand on the gate, not turning back. She asked about you, before the stroke. Every visit she asked if I'd found you, if you were safe. She knew, Delia, she knew I'd done something, though she didn't know what. And she wanted you to know that she didn't leave because of you. She left because of me, because she saw what I was before I knew myself. I turned then. I looked at him one last time, this man who had been my prison and was now, finally, just a man, diminished by truth, reduced to something I could walk away from. "Thank you," I said, "for that. I'll tell her, I know, the next time I visit." I walked through the gate. I didn't look back. I found my car in the parking lot and drove south, toward the city, toward Jonah, toward the life I was building from the wreckage of every version of myself I'd tried to leave behind. He was waiting on the steps of his building when I arrived. He must have been watching for hours, must have calculated the drive, the possible delays, the thousand things that could have gone wrong. He didn't ask how it went. He simply opened his arms and I walked into them, and we stood there on the street in full view of anyone who might be watching, anyone who might care, and I let myself be held. "She knew," I said into his shoulder, the words muffled, private. "My mother. She knew something was wrong. She tried to protect me by leaving, and I've spent my whole life believing she abandoned me, and she was the only one who saw clearly." "Will you see her again?" "As Alina. As someone who visits, who cares, who doesn't need her to remember in order to matter." I pulled back enough to see his face, to anchor myself in the present, the real, the life that was still becoming. Richer. He wasn't what I expected. Not better, just more broken, more aware of his own brokenness. It made him less frightening, somehow. The monster who knows he's a monster is less terrifying than the one who believes he's righteous. And Margaret? Margaret will keep her word or she won't. Either way, we live publicly now. We live where witnesses can see. That's the only protection that ever worked, in the end. Not hiding, but being seen. Jonah nodded, understanding. He had understood this before I had built his protection of me on this principle, the documentary, the concert, the songs that announced my existence to anyone listening closely enough to hear. "Come inside," he said. "I've been writing. I want to play you what came out while you were gone. It's different from the others, less code, more." He paused, searching, more simply true. I followed him up the stairs, through the door, into the apartment that was becoming home, becoming ours, becoming the place where I could finally exist without translation. He sat with his guitar in the chair by the window, the same chair where I'd found him waiting, where he'd written so many songs, where he'd learned to speak to me in melodies when words were too dangerous. I sat across from him, cross-legged on the floor, the position I'd taken years ago in our first apartment when he was unknown and I was unafraid and love seemed like enough to build a life on. "This one's called The Return," he said. "No hidden meanings, no codes, just what happened. What happens next?" He began to play. The song was simple, structurally, just voice and guitar, the way he'd started, the way we'd found each other. But the lyrics were everything we'd been building toward, everything the coded messages had pointed to, the truth finally spoken plain. "She went to meet her ghost today," he sang, and I heard Richard in that word, ghost, the man I was finally learning to release. She walked into the garden where her past was waiting, and she walked out again, and the gate closed behind her. And the sound of the latch was the sound of her own life beginning. "She will visit her mother again," the next verse continued, and I heard my own future in his voice, the visits I would make, the relationship I would build from fragments and patience and the willingness to be present without demanding recognitions. "She will learn the names of nurses, the patterns of days, the particular quality of light through windows at different hours. She will become someone who shows up, who stays, who doesn't disappear even when disappearance is safer." The chorus shifted, expanded, became address instead of description. "And I will be there," he sang, looking at me, through me, into the future we were building note by note. "I will be there in the mornings, in the songs, in the silence when songs are not enough. I will be there when she remembers and when she forgets, when she's brave and when she's frightened, when she's the woman she was and the woman she's becoming and the woman she doesn't recognize yet in mirrors. I will be there because she came back, because she chose to live. Because she walked out of the blue hour and found me waiting, and I was waiting, and I will keep waiting as long as she keeps coming." The final verse was almost spoken, the guitar dropping to a whisper, the melody becoming breath. "This is the last song about grief," he said, and I understood that he was speaking to me directly now, not through persona, not through art, but as himself, Jonah, the man who had written me back to life. "The last song about death and disappearance and the fear of losing what you love. From here we write about presence, about ordinary days, about coffee in the morning and work to do and the miracle of being bored together, safe together, known. She is the living archive," he concluded, returning to the image that had named his album, "My Life, Our Story. And I am the one who gets to witness her, page by page, song by song, all the days we are given, all the versions she becomes. This is the gift of her return. This is the music of her life finally being lived." He stopped playing. The silence was complete, absolute, the space after a song where meaning continues to resonate. "Well?" he asked, and his voice was uncertain, vulnerable, the voice of a man who had risked everything on the chance that I wanted this too. I stood. I crossed the space between us. I took his face in my hands and kissed him, not gently, not carefully, but with all the force of 3 years of waiting, 4 months of coded conversation, 1 morning of facing everything I'd feared and finding myself still standing. Play it again, I said, when I could speak. Play everything. All the songs, the coded ones, the plain ones, everything you wrote while I was hiding and you were waiting. I want to hear them as myself, as Delia and Alina and whoever I'm becoming. I want to hear my whole life in your voice. He smiled. The smile that had been waiting for me, that would keep waiting, that asked for nothing but my presence, my attention, my willingness to stay. That will take hours, he said, I know. I settled onto the floor at his feet, my back against his legs, my head tilted to see his face. I have hours. I have days. I stopped, the realization arriving fully, finally, the truth I had been too cautious to name. I have forever, if you want it, if you're offering. He began to play the first notes of Archivist, the song that had started everything, the code that had brought me back to myself. I'm offering, he said, and his voice was steady, certain, the voice of a man who had learned to wait and was now finally learning to receive. I'm offering everything, for as long as you'll have me. The song continued. The afternoon light moved across the floor, across his hands, across the face I was learning to see clearly, without fear, without the need for translation. I listened. I stayed. I let myself be present in my own life, finally, fully, alive in the archive of his love, the living song we were writing together, note by note, day by day, the music of everything still to come.